"Pack your things, Dad. My wife doesn't want you here anymore. We need our space." That's what my son said to me on a Tuesday evening in October, standing in the kitchen of a house I helped him buy. He didn't shout. That almost made it worse. He said it the way you'd tell someone the weather had changed. Flat, decided. Done. I stood there holding a mug of tea I'd just made. I remember thinking, this is the mug Carol gave me the Christmas before she passed. The one with the little loon on it that she said reminded her of our cottage up near Halliburton. I set it down very carefully on the counter, and I looked at my son, and I said nothing. He didn't meet my eyes. I went upstairs. I sat on the edge of the bed in the room I'd been living in for just over 2 years, the room where I'd stacked my books on the windowsill, because there was no bookshelf, the room where I kept Carol's photo on the nightstand, because it was the first thing I wanted to see in the morning and the last thing before I turned out the light. I sat there in the quiet, and I thought about how I had gotten here, not just to this room, but to this moment. My name is Douglas. No, wait, let me start differently. Introductions can wait. What matters is this. I'm 67 years old. I spent 41 years as a civil engineer, working mostly in Ontario, built a good life, raised a son on my own after Carol was diagnosed when he was 14. We got 9 more years with her after the diagnosis, which was more than the doctors promised. When she finally went, it was February, and the snow that year was something else entirely. I think I shoveled the driveway 4 times the week of the funeral, just to have something to do with my hands. My son's name is Derek. No, I can't use that. Already used it on the channel. Give me a moment. My son. I'll call him my son for now, because that's what he was to me first. Before everything else, he was just my son. His name is Callum. No, that's on the list, too. His name is Preston. That's what I'll call him. Preston Edward, named after my father-in-law, who was a quiet man from Sudbury, who never once raised his voice at anyone in his life. Carol chose that name. I should have remembered that the night Preston told me to pack my bags. Preston was 38. He'd been with his wife, Jocelyn, for 6 years, married for 4. She was originally from Mississauga, but they'd settled in Barrie after Preston got a management position with a logistics company out there. Nice house, newer subdivision, 3 bedrooms, big garage. I helped them with the down payment, $240,000. I didn't loan it to them. I gave it to them. There is a difference, and I learned too late that only one of us understood that. When Carol died, I stayed in our house in Peterborough for about a year. Friends told me not to make any big decisions right away, and that was good advice. But after 12 months of rattling around a 4-bedroom house alone, making coffee for one, and watching the news to have some noise in the room, Preston called and suggested I come stay with them for a while. His idea. I want to be clear about that. His idea. I wasn't the kind of father who expected to be taken in. I had money. I had my pension from the firm. I had Carol's life insurance. I had the investments we'd built over the years. I wasn't rich the way people think of rich, but I was comfortable. I could have bought myself a condo in the Kawarthas and been perfectly fine. I told Preston that. He said, and I can still hear his voice when he said it, "Dad, the house is too big for just us right now, and honestly, I'd feel better knowing you weren't alone." So I went. I moved into the spare room in September, 2 years and 1 month before the night he told me to leave. I paid for groceries every week, without exception. I cooked 3 nights out of 7. I took their dog, a golden retriever named Biscuit that I genuinely loved, for his morning walks so Preston could sleep in before work. I put $3,000 into their joint account every month to help with the mortgage, the utilities, the general cost of having another person in the house. I never missed a month, not once. What I didn't see, or chose not to see, was Jocelyn. Jocelyn was not a bad person, I think, or at least she didn't start out that way. But she had ideas about how a household should run, and I was an obstacle to those ideas. She didn't say it directly. Jocelyn was never direct about anything. She'd mention offhandedly at dinner that she'd been thinking about turning the spare room into a home office, and then look at me like she'd said nothing remarkable. She'd plan things on weekends, trips to her parents in Mississauga, dinners with friends, and somehow I'd only find out at the last minute that I wasn't included, and also that the car I sometimes borrowed would be needed. Small things, the kind of things that are hard to name when someone asks you what's wrong. But she knew what she was doing. I believe that now. The shift happened, I think, when I had my retirement investment portfolio reviewed in the spring of that year. My financial advisor, a man I've worked with for nearly 15 years, good man, sharp as they come, sat me down and told me that, with the markets having recovered the way they had, and with the investments Carol and I had made in our 30s and 40s, compounding the way they had, my total net worth was sitting at just under $4.2 million. This was not counting my pension income, which ran to about $58,000 a year before tax. I told him it felt unreal. He laughed and said, "Most people feel that way." I made the mistake of mentioning it to Preston, not the specific number. I thought I was being vague. I said something like, "The advisor says things are looking very solid. I'm not going to have to worry about anything." And I might have said something about being glad I could help them out and still be fine myself. I don't know how much he told Jocelyn, but something changed in that house after that conversation. Within 3 weeks, Jocelyn had begun asking questions, casual ones but pointed, about whether I had a will sorted out, about whether I'd thought about streamlining my assets. She mentioned, more than once, that a friend of hers had helped her elderly mother move her savings into a family trust, and how it had apparently saved everyone a lot of trouble. I'm a civil engineer, not a fool. I know what a foundation crack looks like. Preston, to his credit, or perhaps not to his credit, because I think he just hadn't found his spine yet, seemed uncomfortable with these conversations. He'd change the subject or wander out of the room, but he never told her to stop. And that was its own kind of answer. By late summer, the atmosphere in the house had curdled into something I didn't have a word for. Jocelyn had stopped including me in the small ways she used to, no longer asking if I wanted tea when she made some, no longer mentioning the plans for the weekend even in passing. Preston was distracted, always on his phone, and when he did talk to me, it was with a kind of careful politeness that felt like distance wearing a mask. Then the Tuesday in October came. After Preston said what he said, I lay awake that night thinking about what I was going to do. I didn't cry. I'd done my crying years ago when Carol was sick, when I sat in hospital parking lots at midnight trying to hold myself together. I didn't have much left in that direction. What I had was clarity. I thought about what this house meant, about the fact that my money was sitting in their walls, in their mortgage, in their garage and their renovated kitchen, and the new deck they'd put on the back 2 summers ago. I thought about how I had, in effect, subsidized this life they were enjoying. Not because they asked me to. I'd done it freely, but I had done it, and now I was being shown the door. In the morning, I got up early. I made my tea. I took Biscuit for his walk. One last time, I knew, and that was the hardest part, honestly, saying goodbye to that dog in my head while he trotted along beside me not knowing anything was wrong. When I got back, I sat at the kitchen table and I wrote Preston a note. Not a long one. I said, "I heard you. I'll be gone by this weekend." I also said the 3,000 stops with me. Then I called my financial advisor before 9 o'clock and I told him I needed to review everything. The will, the investments, the monthly contributions, all of it. I found a furnished rental in Peterborough by Thursday. One of those newer apartment buildings near the water. Good light, a balcony where I could have my morning tea and watch the river. It cost me $1,800 a month, which I could manage with my eyes closed. I was out of Preston's house by Saturday afternoon. I hired 2 men from a moving company, good guys local, and we had everything loaded in under 3 hours. I did not tell Preston what time I was leaving. I left the key on the counter. I took Carol's photo and the loon mug. Preston called that evening. I let it go to voicemail. He said he hoped I wasn't upset. He said Jocelyn had just been stressed. He said maybe we'd overreacted. He used we to mean her. I noticed that. I didn't call back. What came next happened slowly, And then all at once, 3 weeks after I moved out, Preston called again. This time I answered. He sounded different, thinner, somehow, in the voice. He told me he'd gotten a letter from his mortgage lender. I already knew what it was going to say, but I let him tell me. When I'd left, I stopped the $3,000 a month. That was expected. What Preston may not have calculated was what that actually meant for them. They'd bought the house at the top of their budget, and the mortgage payments, with the interest rates having gone the way they had over the past couple of years, were stretching them. The $3,000 I'd been contributing hadn't been extra. It had been structural. On top of that, there were the groceries I'd bought every week, the utilities I'd quietly covered, the small repairs I'd paid for without making a production of it. A new hot water heater the previous spring, the repair to the roof over the garage. All of that was simply gone now. Preston told me they were behind on the mortgage by one payment. He asked me, in a voice that was trying very hard not to sound like asking whether I might consider, just temporarily, continuing some kind of arrangement. I told him I needed to think about it. I asked him to call me in a week. He called in 4 days. Jocelyn, he said, had also sent me an email. I found it later, 4 paragraphs, warm in tone but with an underlying current I recognized. She said she hoped there were no hard feelings. She said the house felt different without me. She said Preston missed me. I noticed she didn't say she missed me. I called Preston back on a Sunday evening and I said very calmly that I had been thinking about what help I was willing to provide going forward. I said that I had been to see my financial advisor and also to see a lawyer who handled estate planning. I said that I had made some changes. He went quiet. I told him that I had revised my will, that the $240,000 I had given them as a down payment had been reclassified, on paper, as a loan, that a promissory note had been drawn up, legally, which reflected this, that this note was now part of my estate documentation, which meant that if something happened to me, the amount would be deducted from any inheritance before distribution. I said that I had also, for the time being, removed Preston as a primary beneficiary of my investment accounts, replacing him with 2 charities, a hospice in Peterborough, where Carol had spent her last weeks, and a scholarship fund at the engineering school in Waterloo, where I had studied. I said this was not permanent. I said it was a reflection of where things stood right now, and that where things stood could change. Preston didn't say anything for a long moment. Then he said, "Dad, that's not fair." I said, "Preston, you told me to leave a home I helped you buy. You gave me 1 day's notice. I'm 67 years old, and my wife has been gone for 3 years. I think we have different ideas about what fair means." He didn't have an answer for that. I hadn't expected him to. What happened next, and this is the part I want to be honest about, because I'm not proud of everything, was that I told him what I was willing to do. I was not willing to resume the $3,000 a month. I was not willing to make the promissory note disappear. But I was willing to delay calling in the loan for 2 years, which would give them time to stabilize their finances and either refinance or make other arrangements. I was also willing to meet with Preston, without Jocelyn, if he wanted to talk. He took a few days with that. When he called back, he said yes to the meeting. He came to my apartment on a Wednesday, arrived at the door looking like he hadn't slept well in weeks. He'd lost a bit of weight. He stood in my kitchen, which was smaller but mine, and he looked around and then he looked at me, and I saw something in his face shift. I should have said something, he told me. When she started in on the things she was saying, about your money, I should have stopped it. I handed him a cup of coffee. I said, "Yes, you should have." We sat at my table for about 2 hours. I'm not going to say it was a movie moment where everything got fixed. It wasn't. Some of what he said frustrated me. Some of what I said probably hurt him more than I intended. But by the end of it, there was something there that hadn't been there before. A bit of honesty. The kind you can only get to by going through something hard. I told him I wasn't trying to destroy them. I told him the will changes weren't punishment. They were me protecting myself, after feeling very much like I hadn't been protected by the people who should have cared about me. I told him that the 3,000 had been my choice and I'd made it freely, but that it should never have been counted on without anyone asking how I felt about it. He nodded at that. He didn't argue. I asked about Jocelyn. He was quiet for a bit. Then he said they'd been talking, that she understood she'd gone about things the wrong way. I said I appreciated hearing that. I didn't say I believed it entirely. I didn't have to. Before he left, he stopped at the door and looked at Carol's photo on the little table in the hallway. I'd framed it better since moving in. Found a good frame at a shop on George Street. Preston looked at it for a long moment, and then he said, "She would have hated all of this." I said, "She would have told both of us off and then made dinner." He smiled. It was the first real smile I'd seen on him since I didn't know when. It hit me harder than I expected. That was 7 months ago now. Things are not the same. I don't think they will be. Not the same as before. Not the same as whatever easy version of family I'd imagined when I moved into that spare room. But I would say they are better than they were, in the way that a broken bone sometimes heals stronger than it was. Preston and I have lunch most Sundays, usually somewhere on the water here in Peterborough. There's a place on the Marina Strip I like. Good fish, unpretentious. We talk about work, mostly, and the news, and sometimes about his mother. We're still finding our way back to each other. Jocelyn has not called me. We have not spoken. I don't know whether that will change. Maybe it will. People surprise you, sometimes in the good direction. I'm trying to leave room for that. I've kept the charitable beneficiaries in my will, at least for now. Not as a punishment, because they do good work, and because Carol believed in that hospice, and I think she was right. I've also set aside a portion of my estate, separate, structured through a trust my lawyer helped me put together, that will go to Preston and Jocelyn's children, if they have them one day. Or simply to Preston when the time is right. I haven't told him that yet. I will when I know the ground is solid enough. My life now is quieter than it was, and I mean that as a compliment to the quiet. I drink my tea on the balcony in the mornings. I've started reading again. Proper reading, not just falling asleep with a book on my chest. I've joined a curling club, which feels very on brand for a man my age in this part of Ontario, and I don't care at all. I've made a couple of friends there. A man about my age named Walter. No, I used that one. A man named Desmond, retired high school teacher. Sharp sense of humor. Lost his wife 2 years before I lost Carol. We understand each other without having to explain much. I miss Biscuit. I told Preston that, and he said I could come by and take him for a walk any time. I took him up on that, and last week I went to Barrie and spent an afternoon walking that dog through a park near their house. It was a good afternoon. Biscuit remembered me. You can tell with dogs, and he pressed his whole body against my leg when I crouched and scratched his ears. Small things. That's what it comes down to, I think. The morning tea, the curling. Desmond's dry jokes, Biscuit in his ears. Sunday lunches with my son. When Carol was sick, she used to say that the trick was not to miss the small things while you were waiting for the big things to get better. She was right about a lot. I don't know what Jocelyn will decide to be, in the end. I don't know whether Preston will fully become the man I know he can be. I don't know whether the promissory note will ever get resolved the way I'd like, or whether the will changes will stay or shift as things evolve. What I know is that I'm 67 years old, and I live in an apartment I like, in a city I know well, and I wake up every morning on my own terms. That's not nothing. That's actually quite a lot. And if you're sitting somewhere right now, listening to this, wondering whether you'd have done the same, I don't have an answer for you. I know what I would do differently. I'd speak up sooner. I'd ask more clearly, earlier, what the arrangement actually was and who expected what. I'd pay attention to the moments when the atmosphere changed, and not tell myself it was just stress. But I also know that I wouldn't trade the clarity I found on the other side of it. Sometimes you have to walk out of a room to understand what you were worth to the people in it. Biscuit knew. He knew from the beginning.